are licensed to operate in the longer term. So that's the fundamental of what our program is about, is recognizing the stakeholders, recognizing how to give them a voice and agency, and also making sure that we have matrices, opportunities to measure the impact of doing that. My colleague and co-leader, Artemis, will explain to you more in detail the nitty-gritty details behind this. So as we talk about the beginning of this program, okay, I'm going to swap. Does it work this way? If not, I'll just use it manually. So where are we at now? One of the things that I'd like to again emphasize is the way we function as a program. We have a set of values and we live through them. One example is how we practice enfranchisement in our day-to-day leadership. We encourage individuals, it could be a research assistant, an ECR, an industry partner, to think and take the leadership in enfranchising the society. So we've managed to create an enfranchising team together. We work very closely with our members and our industry partners, and also looking at how can technology and existing mechanisms assist us as a team to take this forward. And some examples are our charter, which clearly explains the values that we live with: open communication, empowering people, embracing diversity in our projects, memberships, and programs we invest in, etc. The way we work, we have weekly meetings, the leadership and the different project teams. We've also got monthly town hall sessions, and we also have a virtual environment in which anybody today in the audience or virtual or present would like to join the team. We have everything set up to just get you on board and get running. So that's something that we're very proud of as well. In terms of the current team, our team is very dynamic, it's evolving, it's growing. We're very happy to see it's growing. So we've got myself and Artemis, who are the co-leaders, and Kevin, who is our mentor. As our primary team members, we've got Alex, Danielle, who was introduced earlier, Caroline, who's joining us virtually. She's the postdoc who was recruited for this program. Rehan, Anna, and Ignatius and Saman, that I'd also like to say a warm welcome. This is day one of their official time in this program as research assistants supporting us to take the momentum forward. We're also very happy to have, at this stage, 3 PhD students, Diana, Michelle, who are both here, and Jennifer as well. All 3 of them are here. And we've got a number of affiliates. Judy, who has always been there as a critical friend, attending our town halls, giving us insights. Rehane, who's here as well, with her expertise in co-creation and so forth. We've got industry partners, in addition to Danielle, who are helping us with creating programs that are enfranchising in the Brisbane Australian community. And we've got international partnerships as well, people from Europe and other parts of Asia. So the team is quite solid and growing. And in terms of what have we been doing so far, there's a suite of activities which we're very happy to share and get your insights from. First of all, we've been putting a lot of effort into the academic side. As Michael said, enfranchising enterprises is a very new concept. Even yesterday, the conversation was, what do you exactly mean? And we are still asking those questions from ourselves as well. It's quite a broad concept. So one of the key things we've been doing is trying to define what is this concept of enfranchisement? How does it sit within a system? What are the inputs? What are the outputs? How do you measure that? So we are working on a number of conceptual pieces around that. And we are also working on looking at, can we learn lessons from the past in terms of what organizations have been doing, and have emerged a series of case studies. Danielle is leading one of them at the moment, where we're targeting to capture moments of enfranchisement or moments of disenfranchisement where we can learn lessons from. And we've also been very active in trying to secure funding. We've submitted an expression of interest or a notification of intent to apply for a discovery proposal. We've got industry collaborations going forward. And we put a lot of focus also in capability building. So we've had, in addition of partnering with our weekly meetings and monthly town halls, we've had capability training opportunities on writing academic papers, funding, etc. And one of the things we are working on that we are yet to really push forward is how do we create our image, our global image as the thinking tank for enfranchisement in the world. And with that overview, I'd like to pass it on to Artemis, who will go into more detail into each of these different things and open the floor for opportunities to discuss more things with you. Thank you. Artemis, over to you.
So this is not working. Now it's working. It is not working. Okay, so hello everyone. I'm Artemis for those who are online and in the room. Wasn't done a great job at capturing the long journey. We started at the beginning of the year with 5 founding members at the round table, and we've now truly got what I call a program of research with lots of exciting opportunities. And so I guess it's my job to just briefly talk about our conceptual work, the core thinking, and it starts with really the 2 early conceptual paper that we started drafting together. It really started with the founding team. So it wasn't myself and Kevin with this small 1-pager. Really, Kevin started this 1-pager to kind of outline our initial thinking. From there, it grew to a more complex conversation, and we put together a 5-page proposal to slow management review. And so the next version will be hopefully a full theory paper where we start thinking about the rich elements within the concept of enfranchisement. And like Asana said before, this being a very exciting project, it's very easy to have conversation with various parties about this. Everybody can relate to it. But then at the same time, it's been challenging to find focus and the right lens to make this implementable and practical. Where we're up to in this version really centered around this idea of stakeholder capitalism rather than just responding and reporting to shareholders. So we start with this on the screen. So we started with this central core element of the concept, which looked at the multiple stakeholders any enterprise will have when they're thinking about who they should be creating values for. Typically, we only historically, we only report on the financial metrics. Right now, we're looking at ways of capturing social impact, environmental impact, but that balance is perhaps not quite there yet in the overall reporting of any enterprise. And the idea is to center the multiple stakeholders any enterprise will have, but also make it salient that different stakeholders would have perhaps different significance on the timeline in terms of who is most salient current, but in the future, we might be creating different impact for different stakeholders. Some are visible, some are invisible. So that's why on the right-hand side here, you can see we've got this yin value creation versus value destroying kind of idea. And at the kind of right, sorry, still people on the screen. So on the right-hand bottom side, you've got an organization at the same time trying to balance the social value, the financial value, and the environmental they create. And so the idea is we work with different stakeholders and move up and down on this ladder of engagement, which is on the other side of the screen. So you work with different stakeholders, moving up and down the ladders, depending on the need and the time frame when you're thinking about your stakeholder engagement, and you engage them differently with different processes to create values, the social, the environment, and financial values. And appreciating at any point of time when you are creating value with one stakeholder, potentially there's some trade-off or tension with different parts, different stakeholder groups. And so always being mindful of that balance. So that's kind of where we're at with our current thinking. And this is quite a complex space, but also a very exciting space. But there's also a lot of related work on the B Corp, the purpose, and we have different members who might talk to that. So we're kind of at the point of trying to both focus our thinking, but also differentiating it from kind of other theoretical ideas and concepts that's around at the moment. So that's kind of, it's been great to have this one visual that we created to share with different members of our team. And that's kind of stimulated exciting new ideas and follow up. So we now have kind of a package of papers in progress, and the bundle up here in blues are ones that's already kind of in good draft forms. And some of them being in the pipeline, and we're working at where to next. Down here, there's a different patch that's led by different group members, and they kind of papers in planning at various stages. So there is a group of academic papers that we are planning and currently writing. And as Wasana said earlier, we practice in franchise. The idea is to identify opportunities and co-create values with various stakeholders. So we've grown the team, and there's now a lot of different activities that's happening that's really exciting, led by different group members. And in terms of funding opportunity, like Austin said earlier, we have putting in notification of the intent for a discovery, and that's centered around the theorizing process that we've been working. We have some current conversation with various industry partners with the goal of starting with something small as a seed project and maybe eventually go into ARC linkage. There is industry-funded research grant that's under review at the moment in the second round. Hopefully we'll find out soon. Okay, so this is kind of reiterating the range of capability building exercise that we've been doing. We as a team keep emphasizing this enfranchising kind of leadership style that we have. It's about co-creating, and in order to co-create with our members, there's been a range of capability building activities, joint writing papers with team members, and Wasana has led the case study writing series. And we will hear very shortly from our members who are leading different activities to give you a taste of exciting things that's happening in various pockets. So here are the 4 speakers from our team. We have an industry fellow, 2 HDR scholars, and a TCR member who will talk about the exciting project they are currently working on to give you a flavor of how enfranchised has been interpreted in different states. All right, so Daniel, over to you.
Thank you, Artemis. Good morning, everyone. So my background as an industry fellow is as the founder of a consulting business that specializes in strategy and leadership consulting, and more specifically in purpose-led strategy and purposeful leadership to support companies being, I guess, purpose-led businesses. So when I came along to the ideation day in January, I certainly excited to see the synergies with my industry practice and the areas of academic research that Wasana and Artemis were leading. And so, I guess the main intersection that I see between the enfranchising enterprise and purpose in business is that the work that we've been doing for almost 8 years with companies to develop purpose-led strategies pretty much starts with why does this organization exist if it's not just to maximize shareholder value? And so a couple of the key questions that we typically facilitate with our customers, our clients, is, well, how do we create value and for whom? and how else might we create value and for whom into the future. And so, as you can probably hear, that aligns very much with this enfranchising approach, where organisations are actually considering their different stakeholders and how they might create value for them. And as Artemis explained, that sometimes when you increase the value you create for one stakeholder, you may actually erode some value for another. So, for example, if you choose to pay your employees more money, potentially that's less returns that you give back to your shareholders, or perhaps less money that you might be willing to spend with your suppliers and so forth. And so in this way, we can think about organisations as being a whole ecosystem. And just like for ecosystems in the natural environment to be sustainable, there needs to be a flow of energy, and all the different participants need to get adequate energy. In a business ecosystem, it's about what's the flow of value, and is there an optimal flow of value that allows all the participants to prosper? So having been involved in the MIT Sloan Review paper and many other conversations so far, the main piece of work that I'm currently leading is to bring to our work some industry case studies that might inform and challenge the conversations that we have, and perhaps provide reference points. So Wasana and Diana, our PhD student, met with a company, a Brisbane-based company this week. We met with the CEO and one of the founding directors. The company is called IntelliDesign, and they are a design and manufacturing company of electronic products. So my team and I started working with them about 3 years ago. And the nature of the engagement was that the two founders, who'd been running the company for about 25 years, were wanting to transition to, I guess, begin their transition out of the business, and appointed their first CEO. And they hadn't really ever had a strategy before. So they weren't actually looking for a purpose-led strategy, but they were looking for a strategy. And of course, in choosing to engage me and my team, they got a purpose-led strategy. So it's an interesting case study, because they weren't necessarily looking for purpose, but that's what they've started with. And I guess even having reflected on the conversation that we had with the CEO and founder this week, I haven't had a chance to debrief with the team on this yet, but I feel that we probably want to have a whole range of case studies that show the different ways that organisations have come to think about being purpose-led, and the different stakeholders that they have prioritised in that sort of business model design and redesign process that goes with it. So I think that's probably the key points to share with you today. I'm really happy to take any questions and obviously to contribute to the rest of this discussion this morning.
Thank you very much, Danielle. So
thanks for the applause.
So I think this this is the first example of we started with a capability building exercise where we were talking about writing case studies and different approaches that you might have. And Danielle's got this great organization that she's working with, and now we're looking at how do we turn that into a learning case study. So that's the first activity. Diana, yes, you want to just take over? You can screen share. So next we've got Diana, one of our HDR scholar who works closely with Danielle. And so we will see the next interpretation in this phase for a PhD project. Okay.
Okay, Good morning, everyone. I will be really brief and quickly, just to give you a brief what I'm doing with the help. Yep, okay. Can you hear me well? Okay. So I'm doing this purpose intermediate change agents research. First of all, I wanted to give you an introduction on what is the paradigm shift in business and academia that we are experiencing. Right now, we are, before we were thinking of the business thought was around a single objective approach, which emphasizes and accounts just for the shareholder value. But now the shift is towards a pluralistic, multi-objective approach, which emphasizes and accounts for all stakeholders. So as enfranchising enterprise are looking for this enfranchising stakeholders, that's what is happening around business and academia. So we can see examples in the industry. For example, the Business Roundtable in 2019 signed the statement on the purpose of a corporation that include all stakeholders. That was a big change and a big shift because since 1997, this Business Roundtable every year was committed with the shareholder value. But now since 2019, they shifted and they signed this statement of the purpose. They are almost 200 organizations around the world. It's a really powerful organization. So this is something very important that is marking the shift of this paradigm in business and academia. Also, before we managers and research face knowledge fragmentation. The literature, the data, and the communities for different stakeholders' values are fragmented, but now we're looking for this integrated knowledge, multidisciplinary research, and research collaboration across traditional knowledge. So with the research that I'm doing and the first literature review that I did, I found a really interesting empirical phenomenon, which is the purpose intermediary agents. They're organizations that are making change, that are around this concept of corporate purpose and stakeholder capitalism. They are doing something different, but we don't know really well how they are doing. The impact they are doing it. So we are trying to define these purpose intermediate change agents and their effect on the firm's structures, specifically in corporate governance. We've been working in the definition of these purpose intermediate change agents that would be the bridge between what was before shared value, just focusing shared value towards a stakeholder value. So, so far, we think that these purpose intermediate agents are catalyzing transitions toward a purposeful corporate governance by promoting the transition agenda of stakeholder capitalism. They can take form of social movements, non-profits, consultancies, and other stakeholder coalitions. So this is an example: B Corp movement, conscious capitalism movements, shareholder value initiative, economic of mutuality. And they are helping through setting norms and principles. They are helping to develop tools for organizational behavior and decision making in alignment with the corporate purpose. They are also helping in initiating new policy and market processes. And of course, community building. They are acting as an impartial new voice for networks, as a network actors. So we are in a very early stages. We just, this is a preliminary research question, is around how do purpose intermediary agents enable change. So we are looking at what are the characteristics of these purpose intermediate change agents, why they are unique, how they enable change, and what is the change within the organization, specifically in the corporate governance. Some considerations for this research. This is undertaken in collaboration with people with purpose and the industry fellow research Daniel Yu. She is expert on purpose. She really have a really close relationship with these purpose change agents such as B Corp movements and conscious capitalism. So probably we're gonna have a further a potential industry engagement with them. Yeah, we have some target journals. This is a very brief about what we are doing. I'm happy to answer questions and in the future just share with you more about the research. Thank you.
Very much, Diana. So that is a very different interpretation, and we've looked at kind of the purpose corner. As Wasana started in this conversation, we started with this idea of disenfranchisement, and there's a lot of unique groups that is kind of urging the society to give them a voice. On the other hand, we were trying to find positive models that help us create values with different stakeholders. So what we've heard is probably the positive framework in terms of purpose intermediate agents to help us get to the point of multiple stakeholders. And now we're going to kind of switch focus to one unique diversity group that we're particularly paying attention to. So I would like to introduce our next HDR scholar, Michelle. Yeah. This one.
Excellent. So as oh, yes, it is.
It is.
It's working. Right. Thanks, Artemis. As Artemis shared earlier, I've just joined the HDR team as of I think about 6 weeks ago. So very, very fresh. So my research focus is leading diversity in STEM. And so this is, as Artemis mentioned, coming from the other side of the enfranchisement story, the disenfranchisement. And my actual background has really led my passion in this space. So my very first career, I was a systems engineer. So I came through the STEM industry in schooling, into university, and then into industry. And my experiences, unfortunately, were not alone with the very, very small group of females that I had worked with alongside. But one of the key things that I had in those environments is a lot of the times I was the only female, and then there were no senior female leaders. So I actually had no one that I could see as a role model. So this is something that's really driven part of the focus was that the capacity to feel empowered and enfranchised to have a career, because I was very career driven, when I couldn't see what I wanted to become ahead of me. So that has been, I guess, my own personal drive and to why I'm stepping into this space of research. So no, it's not going to work. That's okay.
Are you still scared of sharing the screen?
Yeah. So my research focus is really bringing together the STEM pipeline, which spans from when an individual is first introduced to STEM, often in primary school, in prep, now they've got cute little robots, all the way through to if they become a CEO in an organisation. The statistics aren't particularly positive in that space at the moment. And then visible female leadership. So we see a significant underrepresentation of women in STEM all the way back in education, and that representation gets smaller and smaller and smaller the further we progress through careers. And then finally, STEM organisations, and I'm really taking a complex systems viewpoint of that. And the reason why is a lot of the diversity structures, so things like policies, interventions, sometimes quotas that are introduced, these strategies to try and overcome these barriers in STEM for women are often more of a singularly focused approach / band-aid to a really, really complex problem. So it's a multi-level problem. So singular and simple focused solutions aren't actually resolving the issues. They continue to manifest and persist. And so the idea behind my research through our conversations that we've had in terms of turning it on its head is these are the different, this is what the research tells us are the different barriers to progression that a female in STEM faces at different points in their career, all the way from schooling through to senior level careers. So the actual idea of this, is opposed to coming in and trying to find another way to try and fix the problem, is what if we took a different approach and stepped forward into the future 5 to 10 years, because technology, organizations, disruption is so rapidly changing that what we talk about now, we'll be trying to address a different environment in 5 to 10 years time. So what if we stepped forward 5 to 10 years and said, what does the STEM pipeline need to look like in 5 to 10 years time, and design that? So what if it could be redesigned so there weren't any leaks? And then what if the result of this redesign was enfranchising females in STEM, so that just by nature of what's created, we see an increased representation throughout the entire pipeline. So more visible representation, and therefore more visible female leadership. So very briefly, the methodology that I'm using to take this approach is causal layered analysis. We're going through a critical review of that at the moment. And the reason for selecting this approach is it takes a layered analysis. So at the top in this visible layer, an iceberg, all good models have an iceberg somewhere in them. We have the litany, which is the bit above the surface. The stuff that we always see, it's visible. The challenge in this space is the problem always seems to be too difficult to solve. So we need to go below the surface to see what's happening. So the first place we look is the systematic causes. So what are the processes or system issues that exist? Now, there's always something that drives these particular causal issues. So what's the worldview that drives the system? So we start to look at the structures of beliefs, of values, of assumptions that drive the system. But there's something else that sits under that, and that's the metaphors and myths. So these are the core myths, traditions, stories, gut feels, often the stuff we can't put our finger on, that underlies all of that. And these are deeply, deeply hidden. When we're trying to address a litany, we're typically taking a very short-term perspective. The further through we get, we're talking about, these are ingrained, entrenched biases that exist. So they've formed over the longer term. So that's a bit of a time frame as to how they're formed. Now, this methodology was developed by Sohail and Ayatollah. So it's really a futures foresight tool to use to determine potential futures. It's working again. Excellent. Probably the best way to explain this is a really super quick example. So the other reason why this is a great model is it takes us out of a linear perspective of thinking. So to give a contextual example, we have a lack of visible female leadership in STEM. So that's what we see. It's really, really tangible. So if we dunk below the surface and have a look at some of the systematic causes, we can say, well, there's a perception that goes alongside flexible work arrangements in terms of an individual's level of commitment to their career. I have actually personally been told that when I requested flexible work, that I wasn't committed to my career over my family. It exists, it's real. So the worldview in the organisation that I worked in at the time was that to be successful, I must be working extensive hours in the office. And that, if we really get down into the metaphors and myths, is the male is the breadwinner, the female is the carer. So the great thing with CLA is that we can sit here and we can make this linear relationship. Where the strength of this model comes in is when we start to reverse the process. So in reversing the process, we want to create a new narrative. We want to enfranchise enterprise. So what are the stories, the narratives that we want to go alongside that? Individuals do not exist in solo roles. They can be multiple things to multiple people. So if we translate that into a valuable worldview, an organisation, the value is placed on the ability of that individual to achieve their goals and maintain a healthy work-life balance for them. So if we bring that up to a systems level, flexible work arrangements are the norm in an organisation, from the CEO right down to the male graduate engineer that loves to go to rugby training on a Saturday, but trains twice a week. And then finally, what does that actually visibly look like in organisations? Prominent female leadership across all levels of management. We become more visible in organisations. When you go through this process, it's not just a singular, you go backwards and forwards and backwards and forwards. So we break down the litany into the different systematic causes, and then we create multiple different possibilities and values to represent what the outcomes we're working towards. So through this lens is the direction that I'm planning on taking my research into diversity and STEM, as opposed to trying to patch up a leaky pipeline. Happy to have more of a conversation around this. That's a very quick example, I appreciate. So yeah, come and have a chat.
Excellent. So I hope this really gave you a taste of the different activities that's happening outside. So an inspired. Okay. So last but not least, we have Syed, who's our ECR leading the research in the technology space. I have to stop sharing.
Now? Oh.
So I will stop sharing, and Syed, you can take over screen sharing.
Artemis, I'm not going to share the screen, so that's okay.
Okay, sure.
Yeah. Okay. So,
you can get started, Syed.
yeah, thanks, Artemis, and good morning, everyone. Apologies, I have a few technical issues and my camera stopped working right after having a meeting with Erwin in the morning. So you can watch my latest picture, which is right in front of you. Yeah, so I'm looking into the area of automation and impact of automation on disenfranchisement and enfranchisement. Give you a bit of a background. In 2016, the low-code automation platforms were introduced to industry, and it was taken up by storm. They promise they have huge potential to bring efficiency, operational excellence, and simplicity in business decision making. To date, after 5 years, if you look at the evidence, is actually quite contradictory, where we have staff complaining about anxiety, staff complaining about techno stress, etc., etc. So these technologies have promised initially that by using this low-code automation platforms like RPAs and IPAs and BPMS, people will be released from their mundane day-to-day job, and they will be looking at more value-driven and focus productive outcomes. Now, in USA, a recent survey explains that half of the employees believe that they're doing quite meaningless jobs. Last week, there was a survey by LinkedIn for Australian economy, and it says that 60% of the staff are under stress. So the question is that why these low-code automation technologies are still not able to produce the required results? Why people are resistant against them? Why the promise of value co-creation has not been fulfilled? So what I'm trying to understand here is I'm studying a large scale hospital in Brisbane. The idea here is to understand this whole notion of citizen developer. So what exactly happened is that when we implement these technologies, we create a new breed of developers. We call them the citizen developers. So these are journal staff without any technical knowledge. They can simply create automation application and processes by using drag and drop features of these low-code platforms. In this process, it creates a tension between the normal IT staff versus the citizen developers. So the IT staff takes it as a threat to them. They do not perceive this low-code automation as a viable solution for organization. And in one of the interview with one of our colleague, there was an interesting terminology presented called big A and a small a. So the big A is the standard automation where you have the IT departments involved. It's a large scale, it has huge investments involved. Whereas the small a, which is the hyper automation or low-code automation. So what I'm trying to understand here is that how low-code automation create disenfranchisement as well as enfranchisement in an organizational ecosystem. What features and aspects of low-code automation will lead to disenfranchisement and of course will lead to enfranchisement. And of course, what is the interrelationship between different socio-technical, environmental, and economic factors which will encourage or discourage a diverse set of organizational players and stakeholders to adopt to low-code automation in future. There are many interesting areas which we are I'm exploring. For example, there is a tussle between knowledge spillover versus knowledge withdrawal. So for example, the technical staff do not share knowledge with citizen developers. There are always issues of capacity planning and capacity management and capacity development activities for these endeavors. So that's what it is to date. In the interest of time, I shall not talk too much. Please feel free to drop me an email or contact me if you're interested in understanding or talking about it a bit more deeper. Happy to take any questions. Thank you very much. You don't have to clap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Syed. As you could see, there's an array of really exciting activities, and each member has a very interesting interpretation. We just don't have time to get to everyone. But actually, in the interest of enfranchising, I'd like to take this opportunity to say hi to Caroline, who's stuck in a remote location. Hopefully will be joining us soon, but we'll hear more about Caroline in our next town hall. Just want to get back to our slides. There's no more slides? Sure. All right, okay, so that's taken a good hour as we thought it would. As you could see, it's a year's effort. It's growing into a pretty big program with lots of exciting activities. We welcome conversations, and I'm sure we'll catch up with you individually to talk more about where we can co-create even more values.
Well, thank you so much to all of us. We could maybe have a bit of a public debate, like 5 or 10 minutes, a bit of a Q&A questions, while we're all together, then we kind of spread into individual conversations. organizations. And thanks to all of us in the room. Thanks for those who join us. Maybe to kick it off, what is the one big overarching research question for the team?
You've got a number of them.
If there's one, is there like one that's like a shared North Star? I could hear 6 questions. Is there one big question?
So the question, and let me step in,
Yeah.
is how can organizations become more enfranchising?
Okay.
So that's what's driving us.
Yeah. Okay. All right, any questions, comments from anyone? Wendy? And you probably... Oh, the microphone
I
can come.
was really impressed about how differently you've been thinking since the beginning of the year and how far you've come and what new groupings you have within. And I think that's amazing. I had 2 particular questions. How do you feel B Corps fit within what you're doing? You know, people, profit, planet is not a new concept. And so how are you extending the thinking from B Corps? Also, with my non-profit background and seeing Kylie Kingston there, how are you getting across the concept of nothing about us without us? So I notice in your stakeholders, you don't have disenfranchised groups as one of your stakeholders. And ethically, you know, if we're researching in this space, how are we going to hear those voices? Or are we going to just research and tell them what we think they need for enfranchisement? And I'm sure that's not the intent, but, you know, to take that to the extreme. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Wendy. I think I'll start with the second question. We don't have time to go into the detail, but in our stakeholder kind of explanation that we do have 2 dimensions. One that's the future versus current. One that is size in terms of large, small, and invisible. And so there is an intention to think about stakeholder analysis differently, to highlight the possibility of stakeholders who are invisible or maybe those that are actively not engaged as kind of a way of showing their dissatisfaction with the current system. So there's an awareness of that. And this, as well as where does B Corp fit in? I don't know if Judy's online. Judy is actually working in that space. But I think the next theorizing piece is where we're going to map out everything and really look at how it's different. But I think where we see the different firm is there's a genuine attempt to look at the complexity and multi-dimension element of this, and it's not to see it as separate ecosystems, but to see enterprise as an entity that's kind of thinking about different forms of engagement and trying to do this differently in multiple levels. Yeah.
I'd like to add to the second part of the question, Wendy. In our model, we kind of have meta groups of stakeholders, customers, employees, environment, communities, and we are very aware that there would be multiple subgroups. And when we haven't had the chance to really talk about the operational plans of data collection and so forth, but in those plans, we make a very clear effort to make sure that we do speak to people who are disenfranchised in terms of understanding their needs and how they feel their voice is heard or not heard. So that we see that as a very important part in the operationalization of it. And with your first question, because of the nature of the concept being new, and it's the same with even the purpose-led activities, we are working on clearly conceptualizing, is this an umbrella term that captures B Corp, purpose-led, social enterprises, or is there a difference? And case by case, we see certain differences, we see certain commonalities, and that's one of the conceptual pieces we are trying to work on, precisely what are the boundaries of enfranchising, as opposed, and where are the overlaps, and what's unique about enfranchising that's not there in existing enterprises, such as B Corps.
And maybe Danielle or Diana, because it's an explicit new study, where does what we hear today go beyond B Corp?
Daniel, would you like to take this one?
Yeah, it's a good question that I probably want to think about before giving a bit more of an answer. I think, and to what Wasana was just saying, we're yet to rigorously put the boundaries in place. my instinct at this stage is that enfranchising is a behavior that certain types of organizations undertake, and that a bit like the ladder that's in that initial model and up on the wall there, the ladder of enfranchisement, that organizations could have to be on a sort of a continuum of enfranchisement maturity. And it's possible that they are better at enfranchising some stakeholder groups than others. And to that point, you know, Artemis spoke of the invisible stakeholders. So some stakeholders are really visible to us and others aren't. Sometimes we have selective vision as well. And enfranchisement is not a permanent state. So just because one particular stakeholder group is engaged today doesn't mean they will be tomorrow. So what B Corp does is that it's and this is what Diana's studying, is these sort of intermediaries that are providing frameworks and philosophies. In B Corp's case, they also have a certification, which forces companies that want to achieve that certification to look at their business model through the lenses of workers, communities, environment, and governance. So in that way, embedded in its model is a range of stakeholders, and then specific expectations and standards and ways of, you know, designing their business model to be considered of those stakeholders. So it's one way of enfranchising. It's like a roadmap for companies to follow and to benchmark themselves against, but it's not the only way. And so, yeah, there's still a bit of work for the team to be done to say, well, what is actually new about enfranchising enterprises? The term is new. We've all heard of disenfranchisement. Disenfranchising, we haven't heard of enfranchising, but what is it that is particularly new amongst all of the other stakeholder capitalist approaches, purpose-led, so on?
Thank you.
I want to add to that. Yeah, I think the term disenfranchisement also has crossover with symbolic violence, which is the term by Pierre Bourdieu. It's basically kind of the same, like people or minorities get disregarded. It really matches with active disenfranchisement. And then those minority groups are racial minorities, religious minorities, gender, especially women, and other gender groups that are male, basically, and also disabled people are suppressed groups. And that is also basically those disenfranchised groups we could basically also focus on to specialize on the stakeholders, or like have more groups that we then specifically target. I mean, Michelle and I do the gender aspect, so we could probably focus on the women aspect and some other maybe racial minorities, disabled, religious, whatever we want to look at.
As part of the program design, to have a matrix-like structure to everything that we talk about, all the research questions that we have at the program level can also be asked at individual areas. So there's gender, there's been some early conversations about integrating the indigenous perspective, and some early conversations about looking at our neighboring developing countries and how can, as a nation, as a community, we support and co-create a value creation region, and so on and so forth. But we need more team members, people who are willing to take the leadership as we grow that. So anybody in the audience who would like to suggest a program or a project, we will be very happy to support as best as we can to see those specialized areas come through.
But I think although the program looks diverse and wide, when Michael asked what's our burning question, it's the how. And to me, franchising is a verb. So we're really looking at the mechanisms. And that's a common thread across all the project. Yeah.
It's actually quite similar to trust. So trust is very much what the mechanisms of building trust, the mechanisms of building the idea of being enfranchised. It's interesting that yesterday the Bank of Queensland here, we said there's a clear CFO who looks after the financial side, so the social, the environmental, the enfranchising side of the organization. Who governs this? Who's in charge of this? So the governance mechanism, which is then the link also to the SP one that deals with transformative governance and governance that transforms towards a more enfranchising world would be interesting.
So in reaction to that comment and also what Adele said, I think given this is an opportunity for the SPs to also see the overarching connection, I'd like to make an open call, an invitation that we do see a lot of connections with what we are trying to achieve in the other strategic priorities. So the trust, the governance, how certain external events contribute to enfranchising, disenfranchisement. So we really love to open ongoing conversations across the SPs as a future agenda for us.
Sounds great. Right, one more last question. Is there any?
There's some questions online, so Kylie has a question.
So Kylie, are you there? You want to switch on your microphone?
Yes, hi, thanks. That was a really interesting to learn about the research that you're all doing. Yeah, I just had a question because I just could see a lot of emphasis coming from the for-profit sector and enfranchising stakeholders in that space, which is great. I just finished yesterday writing I actually submitted my thesis for final seminar yesterday on how to give voice, I guess, for want of a better way to say it, to beneficiary stakeholders in the nonprofit space. So I guess I was wondering if you've got any focus in beneficiaries, particularly are known as a marginal and disenfranchised stakeholder in the nonprofit sector. So I wondered if you've got any nonprofit focus as well as the for-profit space.
Yes, so we totally, thank you very much for that question. And there's a reason why we scoped it initially for the for-profit. That is not to ignore the other sectors. We have a very active team member, Alex, who's working on the not-for-profit area and bringing that angle. But we had the view that from a programmatic perspective, we needed to start from a certain place and then grow. So we chose the for-profit, in fact, the for-profit, more larger enterprises as the initial target areas, with the assumption and understanding that in society, they have quite a big footprint in making change. If we could make change in those enterprises, it's quite likely that the momentum will start and others will follow. So it's based on that philosophical view that we started focusing on the for-profit. But one of our research questions is the more larger ecosystem where the not-for-profit enterprises, they certainly play a big role. And if you look at some of the existing work, we've already channeling, you would have seen that one of the academic papers that Alex is leading is around the role for not-for-profit in this ecosystem. One of the discussions we've been having with the potential funding agency, Logan City Council, is to see how can we enfranchise small and medium enterprises to compete with the larger, bigger people in the market with capability building and things like that. So we are expanding, but at the same time wanted to have a focus that we could create some momentum and then build the other aspects of it.
Yeah, great, thanks. I assumed Alex was a bit of a key player in the nonprofit, bringing that nonprofit voice in. So yeah, really interesting. Thanks. I'd love to continue being part of the conversation in the future.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thanks.
And congratulations.
Yes,
Yeah.
congratulations.
Thank you. Don't congratulate yet. Too soon.
It's a big thing.
Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Michael, I'd also like to take this chance to really say thank you to Kevin. Kevin, the hiding behind, didn't have anything to say today. Thank you. Thank you very much for the energy and the time you spend for the program, but also for all the individual activities. So we really appreciate that. And also want to thank each and every member who's been contributing with lots of your time, energy, effort, and also the passion that we bring together as a team. So that's really nice, keeping us driving. And yeah, thank you.
It's very obvious your passion. So well done to all of you. Any more comments, questions? Otherwise, I suggest we bring it to an end. This has been a comprehensive conversation. Thank you so much for this. It's as you highlight, lovely to see the passion. Sometimes when it comes to science, it's important to pull your passion back. And it's great to be passionate. It's a great prerequisite. we just be careful that passion doesn't become counterproductive. Yeah, passion can lead to bias, and then it's more our heart than our brain that talks. So passion is a great prerequisite, but sometimes you have to be surgical as a scientist. And then it's also very important, and I think that sort of balance. I don't have any concerns here. It's just sometimes that's something that we witness, and that's something that is just sometimes brutally required. I like Wendy's comments. I think there's an oversupply of research options, and just because we invest in one doesn't mean that the other doesn't matter. It only means in light of the capacity we have right now, that's what we work. It might not always be the most important, but it might be the most feasible. So we don't take any judgment just because you invest in A doesn't mean that B doesn't matter. That's very important. As an observation across all four, what I like, and it's at the heart of the very optimistic, positive worldview of the Center for Future Enterprise, that you all take a positive lens. So as Jennifer highlighted, it's not about disenfranchising, but about enfranchising. Trust doesn't work on the problem of distrust and disappearance of trust, but it talks about giving birth to entirely new types of trust. External enablement doesn't study the resource-based view of the firm and what do you have in your factory, but what's out there that you could capitalize. What's the next set, the next generation of resources we don't have access to? And Luca's work, the transformative governance, is not about creating the risk-averse, predictable, highly transactional governance, but being open for change, being transformative. So I think all four have in common that sort of very positive lens. And sometimes it's just doing the opposite of the mainstream that puts you with a nice competitive edge. What I also like, I think none of you have worked together 9 months ago. So within 9 months, you really gave birth to a complete new entity here. And it's nice to see the great team spirit, a very multicultural spirit. I think we're early in the room here with 8 people from 7 countries. And I think we had, again, a very similar ratio here. So it's wonderful to see the sort of multicultural focus here as well. So from all of us, thank you so much also for having the courage to invest a lot of your research energy and brain power into a topic that was quite new, but as we can see, full of promise, full of momentum. This is only the starting point of what looks like a very exponential journey. So from all of us, congratulations to where you are right now. Thank you so much. Who join us online. Again, Caroline, will be wonderful to have you in this crowded room very soon. I hope you all have a great weekend. Adela, I hope you feel better very soon. And then let's take the time to continue the conversations here, and we see each other. Is it next week for the next open house? Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much. And again, Anissa, thank you so much for having your fingers everywhere. So this is all possible. Thank you, and enjoy your weekend.